right, welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Andrew Wilner. He is a neurologist and he wrote the Kevin MD article, An Unexpected COVID-19 Vaccine Side Effect. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thanks very much. It's an honor.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
All right, well, I'll start with where I am. I'm an associate professor of neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, Tennessee. And I work as a staff neurologist in the clinic and on the inpatient service. I teach the residents. And as part of how I got here, I'm also board certified in internal medicine. I started out as I'm going to be an internist because they were the thought leaders back in those days. In a stint I had as a locum tenens doc in the ER, I discovered that neurology was super cool. So long story short, I ended up as a neurologist and also locum tenens. I did quite a bit on that. I've written a book on it and I have a series of videos on that on YouTube, and it's kind of a special topic of mine. I think it's a way for doctors to sort of beat the burnout, with locum tenens. But that's kind of a sidelight. So I keep pretty busy now writing. That's always been a big part of what I do. I've written 4 books, including the locum tenens books, and I like to write essays. And if somebody's going to be willing to listen to my opinion, I'm very happy to provide it. And I had something to say, and that's why I wrote to Kevin MD.
So through your lens as a neurologist, paint a picture of what you've been seeing during the pandemic.
I think as everybody knows, although not everybody really seems to digest it, the pandemic is a disaster. It's a catastrophe. People are dying. And the people I see are usually in a coma in the hospital on a ventilator. And they don't talk too much. That's why they were asked to see them. They have encephalopathy. I saw one poor woman, and they said her mental status changed. So I asked the nurse, what does that mean? She said, well, before she was in a coma, but when we stuck the tube down to suction her, she gagged. And yesterday, she didn't gag. So, on a scale of 100, we went from a 2, to a 1, or a 1 to a 0. So we did a CAT scan, which is part of our evaluation frequently. And she had an enormous hemorrhage in her brain. And this was a result, we're not too sure, but in part the treatment that she had for COVID, which was anticoagulation, because a lot of people get blood clots, or it just may have been spontaneous or unrelated. But this is a daily event when I make rounds. And this was part of the impetus for what I wrote. I think no one should underestimate how badly, how severe this virus can damage the body. And often as a consequence, we think the virus does not affect the brain directly. Like a rabies virus goes right to the brain, or a polio virus, goes to neurons. But it's the indirect effects, if it affects the lungs, right? It's a respiratory virus, then you can't breathe. And if you can't breathe, you don't get oxygen to the brain, and then you get brain damage. So we have people talking about who survive COVID that they can't think clearly anymore. So what's that all about? Were they deprived of oxygen during their acute illness? Or was there some sort of fibrosis that occurred, or microhemorrhages? But it's all bad. It's nothing that you want to even get close to. And we take precautions in the hospital. I wash my hands, 100 times a day, maybe more. I have sanitizer in every pocket. It's on the wall. I wear a mask, very uncomfortable. I wear a face shield, fogs up when I cross the street. I think one of the side effects of COVID is I'm probably going to get run over by a truck because I can't see when it's cold out, everything fogs up. So there's a lot of indirect effects, and it makes people anxious and irritable and kind of hard to get along with and stressed.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing is something we really want to get rid of.
Well, hopefully there is light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, and you wrote an article attesting to that. It's titled An Unexpected COVID-19 Vaccine Side Effect. Now, for those who didn't read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Right. So you've heard kind of the why. It's like, well, whatever we can do to get rid of this virus from, our daily lives, we got to do it. And then all of a sudden we start reading about vaccines. It's like, Pfizer's got a vaccine and Moderna's got a vaccine, but they made it, super fast.
Yeah.
And so, McDonald's is good at making hamburgers super fast, but it's not all that complicated. I think all of us kind of appreciate that making a vaccine that's going to actually work and be safe, probably not something, you can do in your basement overnight, right? So I think I certainly had some trepidation that it was being rushed to market. Like beta software, right? Nobody installs beta software. It's like, well, give it some time. It's like, I don't want to be the first one to get this vaccine. And I'm a scientist. I'm a believer in science. Yet when it finally became available at my hospital and I was on the list, I was on the list. First of all, I have direct patient contact, so I'm eligible for vaccine. Secondly, believe it or not, I'm in the 65 plus age group. So that also puts me in a priority, not because I want to be, but because it makes me much more likely to die if I get infected. So I didn't really like being in that group.
Mm-hmm.
So when the vaccine became available with kind of that backstory, I was in the front of the line. It's like, okay, when are you going to give it? I'll be there. So sure enough, I was in the front of the line. I was the first one to get it. And, when my turn came, and I really wasn't all that happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
I got a flu shot and it hurt for 3 months. I'm not a big, I try and wiggle out of it if I can, the sort of optional vaccines. But to me, this was not optional. Anyway, I survived the first shot. It was okay. But it was the second shot. I went back. And one of the things they make you do when you get the vaccine is you have to hang out for about 15 minutes, 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So they make sure you don't drop dead, right afterwards, have an allergic reaction, while you're walking down the stairs. So it was an interesting phenomenon that happened. The room was full of, I'm at the University of Tennessee, so they had University of Tennessee pharmacists, giving the injection. And a lot of the faculty, like myself, were there getting their shots. And then we're kind of stuck. Usually everybody's got someplace to run, but you couldn't leave. So it kind of turned into like a little cocktail party. Hey, how are you? Haven't seen you in a while, because everybody had to kill those 15 minutes before rushing off. And I sensed that I felt different. There was like levity in the air. It was like a celebration, but nobody articulated it. And it was kind of mysterious to me. And as the day wore on, I kindly figured out what happened is that I just felt great. I felt euphoric that unconsciously, now that I had my 2 shots, the chances of me dying, and also one of my main concerns, I've been on the front lines. I see patients, in the hospital who are sick, I try not to spend too much time with them face to face, but, I wear my mask, I wear my shield, and I do what I have to do. But I've been terrified of bringing it home to my wife, and I have a toddler at home, and I don't want him to get sick. That would be the worst thing in the world. And I've made sure, by the way, he's gotten all of his vaccinations, and I hope all of his peers get their vaccinations, Don't want him getting measles and chicken pox and, rubella and all the things I had as a kid. I survived them, but they were kind of nasty, and, he doesn't have to have that. So I didn't want to bring COVID home to them. But, what can I do? I have to go to work, come home, dump the clothes in the washing machine, jump in the shower,
Mm-hmm.
try not to breathe on them for a while, but, kind of helpless. All of a sudden, I wasn't helpless anymore. I thought this was fantastic. And I really felt compelled to write about it because it was so unexpected. A lot of the things I write about kind of think about for days, weeks, months, and structure in my brain and, kind of sort it all out. But this was like an epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of happened, completely unexpected. I was concerned about the side effect of, I'm going to be the one in the million, that has an allergic reaction. But when that didn't happen, I suddenly felt good. And so all of a sudden I became a vaccination advocate. I mean, what I see every day, to me, this is like a fairy tale, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this plague that is now 500,000 Americans dead, right? I remember during the Vietnam War, we watched the stats on TV. You may be too young to remember that, but every night on the 6 o'clock news, how many Americans have died? And eventually the number got up to about 50,000 young men.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 10 times that number. So here's the fairy tale. There's this incredible plague, wipes out 500,000 people. And through the hard work of scientists and the cooperation of pharmaceutical companies and the largesse of the government willing to pay for it, I didn't have to pay for this vaccine. They've come up with something that doesn't cure it, but it's going to prevent it. This is a miracle. People should be dancing in the streets. This is incredible. Suppose there was no vaccine. Oh, I guess we're just going to keep dying, bad luck. Don't go anywhere, stay home. And now we have, of course, it's not perfect, but it's about as close to perfect as you can get in the real world. It's really amazing.
You said at first you had a little bit of trepidation when it came to taking the vaccine. Maybe it was developed too quickly and whatnot. But then you were front of the line. So was there a tipping point that convinced you to overcome some of the reservations that you initially had about the vaccine?
I guess, in medicine, we always talk about risk benefit, right? I'm going to give you penicillin for your infection. You could have an allergic reaction, but, that infection is going to turn into gangrene, and then we're going to have to amputate your toe. What do you think? It's like, oh, okay, I like my toe. I'll take the penicillin.
Sure.
So it really was a risk benefit. It's like, well, I don't want to bring it home. I don't want to get sick. The idea of being intubated, on a ventilator, often for weeks and weeks and weeks, very unpleasant, after which you often die. So it's kind of a slow, agonizing way to go. Some people do survive it. Of course, that's why we do it, hopefully tide them over until they can breathe on their own. But the downside really, and I read about it. I researched this, what are the side effects? I've kept up with all the neurologic complications that have been reported from all over the world. And most of them are complications of just being sick, being sick. All kinds of bad things happen to you, when you're in the ICU, just lying there. It doesn't matter what's wrong with you. Your muscles are going to waste away. Your nerves start wasting away. There's some blood clots. Nothing good happens to you when you're lying in the, you're malnourished. It's not good. So I think it wasn't one. The other thing was, as I've researched this, University of Tennessee has a pretty good website, and every day they put the numbers. How many people were diagnosed, how many people died, in the US and worldwide. And I consulted that frequently because I was writing some articles, scientific kind of articles, this is COVID, preparing grand rounds. And I remember I started preparing grand rounds in March, April, when this first came. It's a brand new thing. What's COVID? What are the neurologic complications? That's my thing. Then I realized my slides got outdated really fast. We're talking about 30,000 people dead, and then it's 90,000, then it's 190,000. It's like, wow, this is a train that is gaining momentum. It's not just fading away all by itself. We got to do something. So I think the logic of the situation really drove me to the shot, but it was the kind of the emotional aspect of it afterwards that really, really struck me. And it was very interesting. After I wrote it, And I started reading, more and more. And I saw that other people had had the same kind of revelation. I saw comics of, now I have a superpower, and people were dressed up like, superheroes, that I wasn't the only one. When I wrote my article, I thought it was just me, which is one of the reasons I wrote it. It's just like, wow, I hadn't read this or seen it anywhere that other people had this kind of euphoria. But it turns out it's actually pretty widespread, that when people get their shot, it's like, whoa, it's just this huge cloud that goes away. Of course, it's not perfect, but, in all that, I think people have such and I'm going to sort of give a public service message here. People have such a poor understanding about risk, and yes, there is a risk to the vaccine, but it's a whole lot less than the risk of getting in your car.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot less than just walking across the street. I mean, the risk of getting struck by lightning is greater than the risk of something bad happening to you from the vaccine. So that means you should never go outside. So anybody I see who leaves their house has already made that risk-benefit decision that, yes, it's safer to leave my house, even though there's lightning. Well, the vaccine is dwarfed, in terms of its risks by these other major risks that we deal with every day. So I really rationally have a hard time sort of understanding, vaccine hesitancy from a logical, rational point of view. I think it's irrational. There are people that believe the world is flat. I read this big article in the New York Times. There's people that believe the world is flat. And they're just convinced that it's flat, that it's a hoax. Whoever figured out that it's round, they were wrong. And these people say, it's hard to make friends when people find out that you're one of those people that believes the world is flat. You lose a lot of your friends. But there's some, society of flat worlders, I think they are. Well, to me, the vaccine hesitancy people, share the stage with them. I mean, this is a no-brainer, if you will, from a neurologist. It's like, you want to get that vaccine. And which one? I've talked to, I'll mention, you see behind me, The Art of Medicine. This is a podcast where I interview people who I think are really interesting and have something to do with medicine. And I interviewed Ken Tyler a couple of weeks ago, who is a neuroinfectious disease specialist. Like myself, he's board certified in internal medicine, board certified in neurology, and has made his career understanding neurologic infections. So needless to say, he's become an expert on COVID. So we talked about this, and we both agreed, whichever vaccine is available to you, that's the one you want to get. Might there be one, that's a little better, but what do they call that? Gilding the lily? I mean, we really don't know which one is better for any specific person. So the one that somebody's willing to give you is the better one. And, down the line, we may all have to take booster shots every year. Who knows? So 2 versus 1, just get that vaccine and don't die. And don't spread it to your neighbor, right? I mean, we all care about our neighbors, right? We have a social contract with the people we live with. We respect them. We even like some of them, right? So you don't want to spread that disease. So if not for yourself, do it for your neighbor.
We're talking to Andrew Wilner. He's a neurologist, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, An Unexpected COVID-19 Vaccine Side Effect. Andrew, you mentioned vaccine hesitancy, and even within the healthcare field, there are still some people who are hesitant to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Can you share any messaging tips to help convince them, or perhaps share some of the euphoria that you so eloquently described previously?
Oh, well, read the article. It's like, I've talked to other, physicians who have gotten the vaccine. And I think a lot of it is kind of, this vaccine hesitancy comes from, sort of this spirit of distrust. We don't trust our organizations. We don't trust authority. I don't know really where that, there's some historical roots for that. And particularly minorities, not very trusting. Oh, they're experimenting on me. But I think that there is a kind of a movement now, as more and more people, this has happened at the hospitals, that some of the hesitant ones have seen others go before them and get the vaccine and are euphoric.
Mm-hmm.
So I think by sort of setting an example, the reality may set in. And also the science of vaccines is such as that if you don't, because I was concerned, boy, they're messing with my RNA, all of that. But it turns out, as I researched it, that if you don't have an immediate complication, that the likelihood of a late complication, 6 months from now, 6 years from now, very remote. That it doesn't really work that way. That medicines we take. I've been involved in clinical research with epilepsy drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a couple of them taken off the market 6 months, a year later, because we saw cumulative side effects. Because, of course, those are medicines you take every day. And, there's been some things that have happened that we didn't see in the trials where we tested 3,000 people. But after 100,000 people took it, we started seeing things that occur 1 in 100,000. But if you've only tried it in 3,000, you're not going to see what happens 1 in 100,000 unless you're lucky. But now we've given the vaccine to millions of people. I read in the New York Times today, I think 2 million people a day are getting the vaccine. So good job. 2 million people a day. That's nice. And so, look around. You have 2 million people a day are doing it. Maybe it's the right thing to do. Protect yourself, protect your family, protect your community, and let's move on. I think, there's so much to be excited about, that the world is going to open up and we can, maybe travel again and do other projects again and have parties again. We've been, my social life been very curtailed. It's not very big even on a good day, but it's really pretty small. I can count the number of times I've been to a restaurant in a year, and in the last on one hand, because social distancing, it's important. It's a contagious disease that you don't want to get, and you don't want to spread.
And my final question: what's your take-home message for the Kevin MD audience?
I'm going to go so far as to say, read Kevin MD.
Thank you.
I read the blogs on Kevin MD, and I find it's very, very interesting because, we live in a diverse community, a diverse world, a diverse group of physicians, and people come at questions from different angles. And it's very interesting to read perspectives, because that's what, Kevin MD is an opinion piece. These aren't scientific articles. It's like, well, this is what happened to me. And some of them are very surprising, and some are really, heart-wrenching. There are people who have decided to leave medicine because of bad things that have happened to them or disappointments. There's kind of stories that you wouldn't otherwise hear. And I find it kind of broadens my own perspective because, we all tend to collaborate with like-minded people. And, it makes us feel good. You agree with me, I agree with you. We're both really smart. It's terrific. But I think it's interesting to be exposed to people with completely different backgrounds and experience and points of view. And there's also the opportunity to comment, because sometimes they're completely off base. So, that's important also. But I think, there's big movements in, the professional world, in medicine, certainly, to accommodate diversity, right? Be inclusive. And I think that's great. And I think it's nice to sort of have it's sort of a smattering, Kevin MD. There's no particular theme, like we need you to write about this. It's like, I guess whatever you think is worth publishing is what happens. My last article, which didn't get nearly as many shares, but was really important to me, I wrote life hacks from a 9-month-old. And that's what I learned from my little baby, the way he approached the world in certainly an innocent but very confident way. And I was like, boy, if only I could be like my 9-month-old, I think my life would be better. So I decided to share that. So I think there's a lot to really gain from sort of scanning the blogs that show up on Kevin MD.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thanks again for sharing your time and insight.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It was great.